Good evening and welcome to the 356th meeting of the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium. This is a weekly lecture series on comics, illustration, animation, and the history of text image work. This series is sponsored in part by the Will and Ann Eisner Family Foundation. And I'm covering for Austin English, who's traveling this week. And our guest tonight is Jesse McManus. And according to his bio, he was born in 1986, grew up in Minneapolis, went to school in Chicago, was unspooled by the Cartoon House in Brooklyn, and now lives and works as a designer, animator in Portland, Oregon. The Cartoon House, in case you don't know, was a loft on Broadway in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn that was kind of a hangout for cartoonists of a certain generation. And no, that's not there anymore. They moved or they lost the lease or something. But anyway, here's Jesse McManus, and his talk is on drawing from the void, or a cartoonist's conundrum. So
All right.
Take it away.
Thanks, Ben. I got a little introduction here. Esteemed colleagues of the New York Comics and Picture Symposium, lend me your ears. I'm honored to be a part of the lineup. Longtime registrant, first-time presenter. I was mind-boggled at the notion of presenting anything because I don't have a presentable peccadillo that I'm gnawing on. No TED Talk thesis other than my life of thinking about and trying to be a cartoonist. But I was assured that some of the eras I've experienced and routes I've taken are not necessarily well documented online. And many people don't know me from a worm on the sidewalk. They may, in fact, know a worm or two better than me. But worms can't draw or write or speak, except using the worm alphabet, which is mostly the letter S, written in dirt. Not bad, but so I'm doing a soft retrospective here, focusing on influences and progress. And of course, as per the symposium, happy to humor any interruptions or questions. Yes, yeah, so the void, kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. And of course, I put the upside down Alfred E. Newman as, the holy fool, kind of a, I gravitate towards these iconic figures, and I think that's part of cartooning. So that's all that is. So can I move to the next slide? It's not letting me.
I think you have to have the cursor on try moving your cursor onto the screen.
I may have to do the thing where it shows me where I see the whole navigator.
Okay.
Might be spoiler alert.
I think if you put your cursor on
it keeps beeping at me.
Oh, really?
Oh, maybe if I play it. Let's see.
Yeah,
Play.
maybe.
Oh, there we are. Hopefully then it won't flip ahead for me. There we go. Do we got it? This is the urchin era. This the only pictures of myself in this thing. I include them because they're from the time when I first started cartooning. That meant drawing in notebooks on the carpet or having nightmares and hypnagogic sights and sounds, as most kids do at night. And the suspenders there were, just part of my young obsession with early 20th century culture, which meant newsies, knives, skeleton keys, comic strips. So front loading this with just childhood drawings of spiky guys, skeletons. That's Howie Mandel from a Beetlejuice ripoff movie. Those are dudes, you're just laying on the carpet drawing these things. Ballpoint pen, right? I don't know what the thing is on the left, but I like it. And on the right, I think it might be some sort of the penguin or something, but umbrellas were interesting. So I think, and Wizard of Oz kind of vibe, angry tree. And also another thing, like one big eyeball on this guy and a curly Q eye on the right. And I feel like that has to be something, but I don't know where that came from. And I feel lucky that my dad saved these things. But you're drawing characters, you're messing around, just building up a callus on your finger. And before too long, I found Mad and obsessively collected it more than any other comic or anything. So these are, effervescences of that obsession. But I was into everyone in the magazine to a degree, but I got fixated on some entities. And it Antonio Prohias just became, he seemed like the ideal cartoonist for me. I was bin crawling for not for back issues of whatever comic was around, but just for another issue of Mad, because I wanted to see another iteration on the face, the Alfred E. Newman face, that holy fool face. And I wanted to see another one page of Spy versus Spy. Because somehow, what I wrote here, and I have minimal notes, but it says he seemed like the ideal cartoonist. Cool drawing, cheeky ideas, cunning espionage, quick resolution, but an eternal conflict. And that's maybe the cartoonist conundrum, in one sense. But so I drew these things. Here's white spy throwing tacks, and he's got magnets behind the black spy. There's baby Spy versus Spy, which is kind of a revolting idea, but squirt guns, even more revolting. Black Spy as a chicken putting his butt or is his beak in the butt of White Spy as a horse. There's both of them, and he's summoning a mechanical ape to blast him. Rock climbing, bungee jumping, Spy versus Archie. So I was looking at other comics, and I know Jacob Berendas might be watching, so he's a big Archie fan, or at least little Archie. Apologies. But in looking at this again, I did one versus Duck Edwing. I was like, who is that? And then I looked, and Duck Edwing, it was another great gag cartoonist, right, from that era or something. And I was paying attention to that, and I didn't know it now. And I just included, before we move on from this stuff, if you have a little kid, it's so good to write what they say something is. And so I drew that even earlier. And my dad wrote down, what I said was that funny show where a guy pushes his watch and a guy with a cloud in his head makes the rules. I don't know what this is, but I vaguely remember this show. So if anybody has any insight. I grew up my mom ran a kids bookstore. So a few of these are the some of those influences. Quentin Blake, Unimpeachable, fantastic. The Flat Man, which is a book by Rose Impey. And somehow the concept of the flat man, this flat thing that sneaks under doors and tries to scare you, but you can blow him away. He's made out of paper, effectively. Um, was I loved it. And Rotten Island was just a party, you know? And Steig was just like Abel's Island, Dr. DeSoto, the list goes on. But however, especially when we're in an era of banning books, because maybe they'll scare kids or mess with them. Um, I don't. I found that Stephen Gamble on the right was much less scary than Don Wood's illustrations for the Napping House. And no hate on Audrey or Don Wood, but I bring it up because my mom told me that this book scared the crap out of you. And when I look at it, I think these stretched out forms and these open mouths, and then this concept that the whole house is asleep, that you're supposed to you need to go to sleep, and this is a house where everyone's asleep, but when they sleep they stretch out and all their mouths are open, scared me. And it's all blue tinged, like a blue night, which I think was supposed to be comforting. But then I look at like Stephen Gamble, this like bleeding eyed skull, and that didn't mess with me at all. It was just kind of fun horror, you know. So I don't know how to come down on that. This is another example. This Slugs book by David Greenberg, the illustrations by Victoria Chatz, terrified me. And I think it's something, what is it, like Searle or so, like some European influence of making these tiny eyes and these shadows behind all the eyes and these lumpy slugs. Maybe it's being an American, but that like scared the crap out of me again. Whereas this Olson's Meat Pie book, which is kind of a melancholic, sad story, about someone losing his business and making meat pies out of garbage, I believe is the thrust of it. That was just like watching a Coen Brothers movie or something when I was little. Whereas this Slugs book, I couldn't have it in the room. I had to like have it moved into the hallway. And this is the same old thing. Like the Berenstein Bear books, I thought were toxic, although I like that ghost. John Belair's books were a miracle, and to have Edward Gorey covers, and I'm exaggerating when I say toxic, like whatever. But as a kid, living in a kid's bookstore, I get jaded about and yeah, Gorey also has that uncanny aspect that's a little bit sort of, I wouldn't even go the length to say disturbed me as a kid. It was just curious. But different reactions to those things. Chris Van Allsburg, Two Bad Ants. This I think prepared me for Fort Thunder, Providence Cartoonists, and other fine art stuff with a lot of mark making. Just wordless, great kids books. And something about the texture of that jewel, or that, I think it's a little grain of sand he's picking up. I could feel it on my nerve endings. And yeah, I think we're getting out of the kids book section here, but Making Faces, a presager or current time of Facetasm with Charles Burns and Panter, like that was a great book of flipping those faces. And Heinrich Drescher was the first person I saw doing that thing of putting little marks all over somebody's skin, which I think Linda Berry, Richard Sala, Klasky Chupo animation, Rugrats. I think I can't place exactly who started that, but I've Heinrich Drescher was great when I was little, and it's fantastic that his son is a super talented cartoonist now too. So those are all big when I was small. Oh yeah, these things too. I was into fantasy stuff. So those Ryan Portfleet or Portvielt and Brian Froud things, they're right on the shelf for me next to ElfQuest, which is a weird, there's something dissonant about it now, but they all made those things seem worth pursuing. And again, they both showed the drawn hand. And this was a big book for me, especially that the ending of the book was the whole time he's drawing comics and he can't draw a hand. And then the finale is that he finally draws one. And he also, in that book, Jules Pfeiffer, I wasn't reading any of his political cartoons or any of his strips because I was 10 years old. But then to see this was completely encouraging as far as you can draw comics. And here's pencil examples. Weirdly, I didn't have to look somewhere else. It was there in a young adult book. Which brings me to the used bookstore in the long box. This is just a photo of the long box I had at my mom's house, which is where I'm drawing this from because there's so many things you can cover. But I front loaded this with influences. We're going to get to my stuff, believe me. But you'd go into a used bookstore in the 90s and you'd get Kurtzman next to Rob Schrab. It's like the graphic novel boom hadn't happened yet, or the manga boom. And so you get things that wouldn't have gone together. And then in putting these together, I noticed the hands, like that Kurtzman hand and that Schraub hand. That's probably unconsciously what I was looking at with these things because I didn't have any historical context. Same thing with this. Well, not same thing, but reading newspaper strips right next to like 90s pretty rough comics for a kid. But you'd go into a used bookstore and there's the comic section. And that's what you got. It wasn't alphabetized. And Ben, you were there too. So I was finding you next to Blegvad, who I think are, birds of a feather. But I wouldn't know that walking in as a kid. I would just see these things and get, no Amazon review, no context, except I'm in a used bookstore. This is on the shelf. It's next to this stuff too. And so you're getting American comics, they're just coming up. You're getting European comics, that someone just decided to sell in a used store. And you're taking it all in. But as just a white bread kid in Minnesota, like it was strip cartoonists that like started to, strip is such a general, like I had the chance to sort of see these in the paper, but not really by the time I was old enough to want to draw my own. And so it was Sunday page books of these two guys that I read first. And so I just started to draw my own ripoffs. And so I don't know, we're in the 90s or something. And by the eye shape, you can tell that I'm ripping off Berkeley Breathed. But on the bottom, by the shoe shape and the squat body, you can tell I'm ripping off Bill Watterson. And just trying to desperately, like I'm using an Ames lettering guide, like trying to follow cartoon rules and just making this kind of stuff that's pretty rough. But, that's where I was at age 9 or 10. Behemoth, Bone, that was there. We cannot deny it. These guys were there hanging out. I wasn't into superheroes, but they were there. This guy was there because I liked knives and I liked sarcastic, weird, violent comics where this guy was there and, and was what's wild to me is that I get the same feeling looking at him now that I did then. Like the vision persists. I guess for all of these things. But when I saw this for the first time, it wasn't like I wasn't confused or blown away. I just felt the zeitgeist of what it was. And whenever I look at his stuff now, it's the same thing. I just included this from the inside cover of that book, which I loved. Frank lives complacently in a house he neither built nor maintains. He merely watches and receives. His food comes from hidden gardens. His godling serves like a mutt. Nobody found more. That's an insane sentence. Nobody found more. Frank cannot see you. He cannot hear you, but he senses you are there and he looks everywhere for you. He knows that when your light has gone out, his song will come into this world no longer. Like that's a head trip for a 12-year-old to read. But wordless comics, absolutely. These guys, well, this guy, Steven Weissman, those were spooky comics too, in a similar way to me. I think that's about brush drawing for me, as is these are otherworldly things, that all these otherworldly influences that were not necessarily related to the outside culture. It was just, obviously, if you're an adult during that era, you would know these people are doing these other things. But as a kid, just taking them at face value was moving. And then we get into mini comics and things. Walt Holcomb, Warren Craighead. And the Warren Craighead comics looked like notebook drawings and had handwriting. So that was pretty interesting, as were these French comics, mini comics. Before I saw anything self-published, I saw the associations, small books. So, what is it? Pâté de mouche. And then the internet came and we got the High Water Books website. And then I get Kachalka and Mark Bell and Ron Rigi, next week's guest, and Matt Brinkman. And I also get the Catastrophe Shop that had so many people that suddenly made it seem approachable. Not just reading things in the long box. Kevin Huizenga, who's running that and made wonderful mini comics. And now I'm sorry to embarrass all these people I think I'm embarrassing everyone who's still working now by showing their early work, but I'm showing my early work too. So we're all on the pyre. In absentia this week, our friend Austin English, when he used to draw all his stuff with, China markers or colored pencils, and color every page in of the zine. I bought this from him when I first met him in 2003. And, or was it 2000? Yeah, that Mocha Festival. And it was completely inspiring because it was like, there was 12 pages to this book or something. And it was a complete idea. And made you feel like you could make it yourself too. Matthew Thurber, again, I know he'd rather than me not show this, but that Ambergris Digest cover messed me up. It was such a good cover. And the Flying Fox, it's there, 2003. These are ancient documents. I put this page because I just thought that was so funny, talking about the Flying Fox, everything he does. When he says, when he sprinkles pine needles on a farmer's livestock, that animal will die. And I just thought that was a great legend to add to what a flying fox could do. James Quo, Providence dude, who I argue is one of the only autobiographical cartoonists, because he would make these small books where he'd notate 10 minutes for every 10 minutes of the day. You know, most people are talking about something that happened a week ago, but James Quo was putting 10 minutes for every day before social media. Jason T. Miles, you know, former another guest of the symposium, found him through the internet too, and I think it's just there in the drawing instantly. He loved line work. This thing is about a bunch of feral children who find a miniature horse and beat him up, and are just breathing and living in this kind of horrible world with a volcano. But it was so inspiring to me that he could have one little concept and make a mini comic out of it, that I would mail him stuff. And sometimes you mail something to someone and they send you a drawing back. And so that showed me that the people drawing these things are real, and they're nice for the most part. And that we're all just trying to draw, which you don't always get when you're looking at a book. Big questions. I'll try to rip through a few these influence things. I was in Chicago. Anders Nilsson was there. This was a fantastic minimalist thing to see at the time. Jason Overby, that's a Portland cartoonist. I don't see many completely pictureless comics that I love, but I love his work. And yeah, Thomas Herpick and Pendleton Ward went on to be TV people of great infamy, but they were in the zone too in mini comics. CF, the guest from last week, gave me freedom feelings and knew that my notebook drawings would, I could explore and I could keep exploring, and that it actually didn't matter. Narrative didn't necessarily need to be on the table all the time, but drawing could be a practice. And he came from Brinkman, not from, but respects these Providence artists who, wordless comics again, Aragonis, Prohias, like Trondheim, Brinkman, and then Chippendale, who we come down on it, that I realize that was a limit case for me, where these were friendly gag comics in a way. He's making characters, he's having adventures, but they're in the snake reading style, right to left, down to left to right, right to left, and so much mark making that it changed things for me too. To the point I was seeing these things online. This is from the Catastrophe Shop on the left. Ben Jones is another dude, of course, who was making weird, stupid comics. And this is the first time I saw a cover that had a vertically centered thing. Somehow that shot a bolt into my brain. So this is 2003 comics for me. And I had a character and wanted a vertically centered cover. And it was Heifu Comics issue #1 by Jesse McManus, is what those letters say. Heifu, it's still my website, heifu.com. It was just a nonsense word. It sounds like a name for a piece of gum or something. People always think it's hey, F you. It's Heifu. It's like a fake brand. And these is what those comics look like. It's when I look at this now, it looks like me ripping off Kachalka crossed with Brinkman or something, because I wanted to do so much mark making, but I was learning how to use a brush, and learning how to use a page, and I'm still doing those things. And the back cover was ripped off from Jeff Smith. In that way, that final, how he'd always have one panel on the back. I made more mini comics. After that, Pirate one about bugs. Catastrophe Shop inspired me to try and do that. And that's what these comics looked like at the time. Just characters moving around, um, and little adventures. I didn't have a lot of narrative. I loved the written word, but I didn't have narrative in any of my stuff then, because things that made me want to draw were mostly just characters moving around, with some exceptions. So, palate cleanser. I'm gonna take a drink of water. Are we doing all right so far here, Ben?
Yeah, fine. Go ahead. Continue.
Okay. So at that time, Sammy Harcum was in the mix too, mini comics, reaching out. And he was the first person who I would send him stuff. And this is a drawing. I went with Jason Miles. I would send stuff to him and get a piece of art back, which was very charitable. But uh, he invited me to be in Kramer's when I was in Chicago. We're fast forwarding to from childhood to when I'm 18. And so I drew, he was working on Kramer 7. So I drew this page for him one summer. And this did not get in the book. And probably for good reason. But and now here, and since it's such a big page, we're having the same problem that I would have then, which is I have to piece together phone photos like you would piece together scans. It was like a safari comic strip with this old guy, like this geriatric man named Elderly Flex, and this little Buster Brown guy named Nils Pottery Lifechild. And they're on a safari. Elderly Flex is underwater finding a slug on a ship, a broken boat, shooting it. Nils Pottery Lifechild is, on a having like next to a picnic blanket that they've done as colonizers or something, and trying to catch a little monkey eating a banana. He almost chokes the thing out and is pulling it until he can tie it to a shovel. Meanwhile, Elderly Flex is what is through the jungle with his slug in his mouth. The monkey, the poor thing, is just like struggling on his leash. Elderly Flex comes and sees that Nils Pottery Lifechild's clothes are gone, and that the leash is ripped. But he sees that a leaf has fallen from a tree, and nakedly, pale blue, he climbs up into the tree, and 4 sizes of monkey are cleaning Nils Pottery Lifechild, and he's overjoyed. And I think in the bottom left, I see a little monkey with a spear. Now, I understand that Sammy would be like, maybe not enough story. So I drew another page at this 16 by 21 size and just adapted a Richard Brodigan story, with the same kid. And these were all, I should say, this is all drawn with brush. I was into drawing as tightly with a brush as I could, and then watercoloring in. So this is, yeah, I think only the lettering in this is drawn with a pen, but that was the brain space I was in. So one morning I was having trouble with my arithmetic. The tigers came in. They were dangerous, but they had beautiful voices. Don't be afraid. Just sit where you are and we'll tell you a story. I know a good story about a rabbit. What kind of story would you like to hear? I don't want to hear a story. You could help me with my arithmetic. Your what? Oh, your arithmetic. Yeah. What do you want to know? What's 9 times 9? 81. What's 8 times 8? 56. Thanks for helping me with my arithmetic. Think nothing of it. Now go away. We're very bored with your questions. Please try to understand. We tigers are not evil. This is just a thing we have to do. All right. The tigers are so nice. Why do they have to go and do things like that? Fish sing. I've had a lot of good conversations with them. Yeah, they have a nice way of stating things. What do you think of that? Pointing to a dead fish floating down the river. It's got a head start. Womp womp. So that was rejected too. And I think maybe for good measure. So I drew this one. I'm not going to read all of this altogether, but has nothing to do with Broad again. You know, it's about a guy that is, a Lothario besmirched, like has to leave his community. Thinks he's a writer. Ends up boarding a raft that takes him to an island full of goblins or trolls. Again, going back to the, my interest in fantasy creatures. There they are with fresh fruit, fresh grass, and broken glass. And when he gets to the island, he resolves to devote himself to blind clock repair and how to kill animals, which are maybe the panels I'm still like from this thing, because those are pretty wild things to be interested in. So I managed to meet Ben Catcher and go to SPX and be around that book. But then I kept making mini comics, this panpipe series where I started making collages. Because as a way of kind of recombining what I was thinking about and using comics I'd drawn in college and reconfiguring them. I'm always reformatting things. It's really hard for me to start and settle on a format. This was a little mini comic at one point. It became a 2-pager or a 8-pager. Same thing with this. This looks even more collagey, just putting drawings together, which, was an inspiring way for me to work. Black and white things, high contrast. And then I moved back to town and decided I wanted to draw a big book. When town, I say Minneapolis. And this is 2009 or so, and made this thing. And I keep harping about it because I've moved it through so many formats, but it's finished. This is just to show the original art, which it's about these kids. They have a frog and they live in a house. They have a crawl space in the house. There's a feral child who lives in the crawl space. He eats frogs. There's a knife in the mix. They hang out in the hallway. And here you can see it's blue pencil and then nibs for all the lettering when it's there. But it's just, this is enjoying brushwork for myself. This unusual guy comes, encounters a chihuahua and other cats and animals in the house. He has a knife too. They summon basically the voidlings. This is the first time that I worked on the idea of you can open up, just peel back one dimension, and there's probably a multifarious field of ambivalent things that may or may not be controlling your fate. And if they come out of it, they may just get up to mischief. And so you're forced to look back at the crawl space in your house. So yeah, then I moved to Portland. Here's my desk at the time. Here was my apartment at the time, where I was drawing things and posting them up on walls. In the same method, but trying to make something closer to those Trondheim books, or an early thing, which is almost like brainless, wordless comics where things are just happening, as a way to keep me working because I didn't want to stop drawing. And it was hard to, I couldn't follow a script and I couldn't write a script until Austin came, and he lived there too at the time. And he said, I'll write you a script. So Austin wrote this like an old, like trying to be like one of those 90s comics, like Image Comics or like The Tick or Scud or something. And he wrote Spider Monkey, a script for me. So I drew, then got into the mode and drew a more traditional comic. And this was around the time we're cruising to the finale, I sure, but this is around the time that I started getting commercial work. That I was living on my own, and I had put out some feelers so that a studio in town started giving me like animation storyboarding, character design work. And suddenly it split how I do things. And the experience with Austin doing Spider Monkey was like, oh, I can take requests. I've shown you, I've gone through a decade of not taking requests. And suddenly people are telling me what to draw was surprisingly a relief. But I in this presentation, I didn't want to share any of that stuff. Like if you Google me or go onto my website, you can see commercial things I've worked on. And shouts out to Rob Shaw, Solomon Burbridge, and Bent Image Lab, and Trevor Stewart, people who kept me alive. But I didn't want to include commercial work in this because this is just stuff that nobody asked me to do. And then that's where, while I was doing commercial work, I would do this on my own and just get into this drawing zone. Oh, pardon me. And see where I could go. Just be in a non-space. Just just an exploratory drawing space. I guess it's called having a drawing practice, huh? Where sometimes it gives narrative, sometimes it doesn't. And here's an example. Then he would get into gag comics, with one or two men, vaudevillian. But then he would go back and crash into this zone, which is also the same brain space as character design. I feel like if someone asks you to draw a duck, you could draw 200 ducks and they can, it's hard to but this is where there's no control. Just letting myself be in that place, which is more free or more structured as it may be, just wanting to make marks or wanting to make grids. And mini comics came out of that. This is one of the more collagey ones. A final palette cleanser. Oh no. The Wake. So I got into Finnegan's Wake. It's one of my favorite books, but it also destroyed how I felt about narrative all the time. And I suddenly got lost in that entire world. But I've talked for long enough, so I'm not gonna go on about it. I just bring it up because I love that book and I loved it so much I put stickers on the cover. And so when Tom Kaczynski from Minneapolis asked me to collect my comics into a book, I tried to mimic it with those two dots on the eyes. And so I made this book with him. Yeah, see? Yeah. A reference that only I would get, or only I should, until now, because I don't aspire to be Joycean. In fact, I think it didn't always help me, although I love it to death. But, you know, here's that Buster Brown again in the right side. 1886 is him. 1896 is the yellow kid. 1986, unfortunately, is me. And so that story got colored by me and became a whole book along with black and white comics. And like I said, Joycean madness and love made me combine all of these things without putting chapter headings or without trying to explain to people to some degree what it was. I hope they can just enjoy the book. But what this is the hallway at the end of the book, or it's from that story where the entire time I was drawing it, I was in one room imagining the other room, the other hallway as I drew it. That was my writing restriction. And at the end of everything, that's what I got. Blood splattered hallway. Since then, I drew a comic called Mr. B, which I didn't realize I was ripping off a Blue Oyster Cult album cover when I did this cover. But you learn, you live and you learn. And these were some of the comics trying to draw since then, while I'm also doing commercial work and trying to not lose the track of what I love about drawing comics, which is often gritting things out, having a story that can go anywhere, inventing characters and bringing ideas I love that are only important to me. Like this, he has a worm attached to a bone in his leg, and the other guy plays a harp so that he can eject the worm out of an aperture in his leg, and it becomes sort of a paper like animate object. Then he goes and disguises himself as a mouse so he can crawl into a cat's mouth, where he meets there's a bunch of bugs who live deep under the factory where he works. And this is the boss of the factory, who's very intelligent. He rides the tapeworm around. Turns out that he's actually a frog encased in a human's body. And the tapeworm eventually gets free and finds its next victim. Those are thumbnails of the thing. I also melted down and did what's more or less an abstract comic where I did not want to have any human sort of thing going on. So I feel like it's successful, but it's in that strange netherworld of narrative and non-narrative that eventually I couldn't help but have a dog kind of thing in there that's navigating this landscape. It's like I couldn't just do an abstract thing. It's lines turn into lakes, turn into rivers, turn into trees. Like free association is my bread and butter. So finally, after that phase, Austin asked me to draw an actual comic. He told me 8 pages. It's for this anthology Jaywalk that the esteemed Floyd Tangeman, Dr. T, is putting together. And he said that these Dead Crow people are wonderful and you should make 8 pages for us. And the anthology is Jaywalk. So I thought, I've never wanted to draw stuff about myself. Obviously, I'm rambling about fantastical things and free association, but I rejected the notion of like the 90s autobio cartoonist. But when I was like in that era, when I was going to buy Bone comics, I got hit by a car when I was jaywalking. So for once I wrote a script and wrote point by point what had happened in my experience. And I loved it. I loved having an ending to something, having knowing what was going to happen, being able to, put those things in panels, thumbnail it. It's like, oh my God, now I'm actually drawing a comic. Um, but now I'm working digitally. So this follows the 8 pages of that's my rough draft on the left. That's the first thing I did digitally was put in the letters. It starts with me at a violin lesson, so I had to remember how to suddenly I had to reference and remember how to draw someone playing a violin, which I sucked at. Both, well, I like my drawing, but I sucked at playing violin. Again, the rough drafts. I'm going to the comic book store and finding that they don't have a copy of Bone. They don't even know what that comic is because it's 1993. But this is just to show, that I printed it. This was one comic where I printed out every phase of the process to like remind myself and to look at it on the page because suddenly I'm working digitally through that's the transition from the other stuff is suddenly working on a Cintiq. Um, and finding myself on the street, realizing I have to draw cars, still drawing with ballpoint pen, but then scanning it in and realizing I can finish drawings of cars quick. I look left and right. Again, this is just adding texture to the road. Crossing the street, womp, adding the sound effects, adding the texture, womp, scree. Because, it was a big street. I looked left, looked right. By the time I looked left, ran, a car was coming from the left. And I got hit and I got tunnel vision. And so you can see in the rough draft version, the fourth panel, I was about to draw myself crashing into the ground, but the tunnel vision was not that. It was that the whole world shrunk down and flipped upside down as I was tucking and rolling. And then I found myself looking at my hands again. And the first thought was, no, 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 no. We did this. We don't want to do this. I don't want this to happen. It's so inconvenient. But it was too late. And so people came around me and thought I was hurt. And again, this is an odd way to read the story. I'm showing process, but I was driven to the hospital in an ambulance because my parents like me. and 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 when I got there, they just found the piece of headlight that I'd broken off with my hip. But I was so embarrassed that I had to go and that's what I said. Like, I can't believe I'm missing Simpsons and Seinfeld for this. And I'm sorry if any of you are missing Simpsons or Seinfeld for this talk, but but yeah, it was that's some rough process for making an actual structured comic for the first time in a long time. So my epilogue is the void persists. I'm still figuring this out and trying to make more comics. And almost after doing that thing about myself, wanted to go back into like a fantastical, wanted to just draw about aliens and nothingness or somethingness, or just go expand world building. But turns out world building is really hard. And it always has been. And so I'm taking these things slow and taking notes. And because I don't have a story for my own life I want to tell in quite that way, but I also, in presenting stuff here, like, I don't want to like spoil the fun of being creative, except this here's an alien that discovers a cabin that's full of squirrel monkeys that are eating alive a man's corpse. And last but not least, I wanted to just show kind of an actual drawing zone. And we've gone on a long time. So this is I feel like I have to be my own director now sometimes and just riff on ideas and riff on character design concepts and try to find something that matters, because nothing in the culture is telling me what I'm supposed to draw. I actually do have to draw from the void and follow enthusiasms and you know I found that in these talks that nobody showed themselves drawing, and I appreciated that one beautiful thing about working digitally now. And I'm not saying I won't work non-digitally, because I do like pen and ink, but I liked how you could screen capture things now. And so I wanted to just give one example of this. And what's weird is that it's so slow to draw. But I don't want to be on the camp of saying that that's a bad thing. Like, I think it's wonderful that it takes so long to draw things and gives you time to reflect on them. And the same thing with stories and storytelling. And when I was young and was making friends with lots of cartoonists, I'd feel a lot of urgency and a lot of fear. But I like that it's a thing that you get to keep doing, and that you get to keep developing this thing. I might sound chaotic when I talk, and even now I'm going to do some scrubbing and fast forward this to this moment where I'm zoomed in and drawing shapes that are justified by the mutant that I've decided that I want to draw. And I like living in that void of just drawing practice. And yeah, the unspeakable. And this is completely speakable. This is a mutant that I'm drawing. But I think to get into that place, whether you're drawing a portrait or drawing a concept, you do get into a place that is hard to describe. But then when you bring up a video of it like this, it's very simple. I'm drawing teeth, for example. So this keeps going for a couple minutes, but it doesn't need to. There you go. Fast forward it, because we've taken up enough of all of your time. And I appreciate your concern. And that's all, folks. Thank you for listening to my ramble, and thank you, Ben, for hosting. I really appreciate it. Should I stop share?
Yeah, so we can see everybody. Great collection of pictures, like another parallel history of comics. I'm in another
Excellent.
world. But anyways, great. So if there any, are you open to questions or
Absolutely.
comments? So if you have a question,
Hey,
just
folks.
put your
Hey,
name
Andy.
in
Hey,
the
Bill.
chat and we can you can unmute yourself. Oh my God, I'm breaking. Anybody?
Hi, Jesse.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, I have
Hey,
a question.
buddies.
Um, I've known you for a while. I've never known you to carry a knife. Um, can you talk about the knife and its frequency of appearance versus your own predilection towards violence or preparedness to be engaged in acts of violence with a knife?
Well, Mr. Pangerstrange, it's if you don't recall, it was in the first slide,
Hmm.
I referenced the fact that I was obsessed with stuff from the 1890s and the early 20th century,
Yeah.
where a young boy should carry a knife and where old men shave themselves with a knife.
Mhm.
None of this Gillette business.
No.
And so I think it's just a good example of primitive but effective technology,
Hmm.
which is what a book is.
Nice.
So if I'm making a book, why not include, birds of a feather, right? Throw some knives in there.
Good answer. Good answer.
Love you guys. Thank you.
Anybody else? Hmm.
It's just going to be Andy asking about knives tonight, Ben.
That's okay.
I haven't even looked in the chat.
Bill has a question. You can unmute
Hey,
yourself.
Jesse, good to see you.
Hey, dude.
One thing I was wondering is, I know you were talking about your commercial work and you've done work for animation studios in Portland, but I'm also under the impression that you did study some animation and you've done animation as personal work. Is that true, or was that pretty much just in school?
That was mostly in school. I've I've done stuff, but haven't like I think, yeah, the way it's framed here. I've never made a short that I wanted to take to a festival. And I realized that getting into animation in school and out of school, like Rob Shaw is someone I worked with commercially, but he's always in his free time, he's taking things to festivals. And I realized, oh, that's like me going to Mocha or going to Brooklyn Fest. And I was like, I studied it in school, but I never took that leap to actually bringing those out to festivals, except for the iWorks festival, but that's because I went to school with Lily Carre. So that was they invited me through that past knowledge. But no, you make a really good point that it's like, uh, I haven't, but I haven't made a short recently. So if I don't have something to bring to that, then why, I'm a spectator. Nothing wrong with that, but
No
you
pressure.
point.
I was just curious. No pressure.
No,
No pressure.
no, I love animation, and the fact that you would ask that, and I feel the pressure from you, like someone like you or someone like Matthew Thurber, who's doing non-commercial animation, where I'm like, this is still a medium I love, but I can't always track what I'm focusing on. And maybe that's the thing, I don't know where to send things. Sometimes these comics festivals, we know through the pandemic, that if suddenly that's taken away from you, suddenly it's like, oh, what did I used to spend half the year trying to work towards? And even though I do animation, I'm not you know, I'm not immediately pointed at where do I put it, you know. So that's an open question, and I that's mercifully, I'd rather that than been saying I hate it all, tear it all down. I'm like, no, I want to do it. I'm not sure where, except in the void. Thanks, Bill.
I remember one time, if I'm not mistaken, you set up an animation stand at Cartoon House in your room, or you were
Yeah.
thinking about it.
Yeah. No, I did. No, it's I think it's gotten even easier to set up animation stuff with, because remember when I lived with you, we didn't have iPhones. Like now it's easy enough to set up an animation stand. So really I have no excuse other than my own distractions. But yeah,
we also didn't have like fresh food.
Yeah, but we survived. And but yeah, not enough animation made since then on my part. You're very right, and I'm not ashamed. I'm glad you pointed out, because that augurs me to do more. You know, it's fun drawing all those pictures. Come on, it's a blast. Oh, we got. I haven't even looked in the chat here.
Yeah, there's a question from Matthew Thurber in the chat. Do you want to ask that, Matthew, or just read it?
Hello?
Yeah, hi, you could read it.
Oh, okay. I'll just read what I just wrote, which is I just was wondering if you could talk about reading and how it is included in your life and in your schedule if you make time for reading. Because you mentioned, I mean, I think a lot of your talk was discussing like influences, and sometimes they are right in your work, like the Brodigan adaptation. But then I was just also wondering, yeah, do you go back and read things? Do you make time for reading in your schedule? Can you talk about reading?
Yes. Thanks, Matthew. Uh, I I feel like I I have like a I tend to binge read. Like I read casually a lot. Like I have like what on my shelf and by my bed are like the Boxman, um and and like the Zap Gun by Philip K. Dick, like a couple books, and I'll like dip into them. But then sometimes I'll know that I want to give a book my attention, and unless it's like some massive weird thing, I'd love to like treat it like a movie, or treat it like watching a double feature. Like I don't know, this is my chance then to say that's one of my favorite ways to read, is like if there's a book I want to read and I'm like, okay, tonight, let's say it's 11 p.m. I don't have anything going on tomorrow. Now from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., it's this book. And I just get to live that book. And inevitably, that is kind of overwhelming. So I end up, you know, having to take pee breaks and cry and stuff like that. But it's like, that's what I say by binge reading. There's books I read bit by bit, but one of my favorite things is just making time, like making like 2 to 6 hours to go into something. Doesn't mean I have to finish it then, but just I've I wanna fully engage, you know. And to be honest, I've done that with your books. I've done that with Ben's books. I've done that with many cartoonists who may or may not be watching, where it's hard for me to just dip in and get a taste for it. I want to like sit down and spend a lot of time. It's more fun than Netflix. So yeah, I read.
Okay. There's a question here from Generoso Piero. Asked me to read it. Is it difficult for you to do personal work in the same physical space as your commercial work?
Thank you, Generoso. I just realized I ignored the end of Matt's question, which is, do you read comics a lot? And I don't as much as I should. I read some, but I'm not reading comics all the time. But Generoso, it's really easy to do my like you're seeing my desk here, where maybe personal work is, and what you can't see is the Cintiq right in front of me. Oh, Bill's saying I should be careful about the word should. I should read more comics. Or I don't know, but yeah. I've during the pandemic to work from home, I made things like functional for myself, so I didn't have to commute, and I could get the jobs that I was getting before then to just pay my rent. But sometimes I wonder if having your commercial desk be the same thing as your personal desk is the best route. Like if I went to a different place to work, if I could compartmentalize my brain better. And that's an interesting question for the future, because right now everything is jammed together, including I'm talking to you on the same screen that I like do all of my personal and commercial work on. Like everything is jammed together. The only escape is going to bed and reading a book. So I'm open to a separation of church and state as but yeah, so far they're all jammed together, unfortunately. Yeah, you're welcome, Generoso. Okay. I'm looking at Lala in the chat saying the slug one scared me so bad, but I also loved it, which is that kid's book. Like, Ben, could I ask you something?
Yeah, sure.
Don't mean to like how do you feel working more digital now?
I don't know. I've been doing it a long time, so it's because the stuff all ends up being digitized in the end. So I think of it as like somebody doing etchings works on a plate of copper or something, and somebody who works in printing which is the the back end is digital. So you work digitally. Why would you work on a piece of paper when you're making a digital file to be output? Either if they're printing, depending if it's offset but yeah. So and anyway, I have many years of paper drawings. I ran out of space actually to keep all this stuff. That's another thing that happened if you live long enough. You run out of physical space. So, but then, and I also work, digital. I'll draw digitally and then output it on paper and do watercolor, real watercolor. So I do combinations too. But
I only ask because what's odd to me is maybe it seems absurd that a lot of my presentation was showing, my stacks of paper drawings and things, but I've found that I even like the tactility of plastic on the screen and the flexibility of software, but it's like it's like just a different taste of food or something.
Right.
It's weird.
Yeah, I think in some strange way it is more sensitive than any brush. Like all like digital scans are more sensitive than a camera or your eye. I mean, so it's where technology is taking these things, these forms. You know, I mean, the idea of being able to draw in layers, endless layers, is like that's like this thing you could only do now. You couldn't. So why not play around with these things? Well, I mean, and also I'm lazy and I hate art materials. I'm not somebody who loves the materiality of drawing. So it was great for me. I reduced it to the most minimum equipment, you know, and now this let me get rid of it all. I don't. So I'm not, I'm not a good example of someone who loves something about drawing.
Well, I don't know if ironic's the right term, but it's strange that you know, you you certainly made me get excited about pen and ink, and those and it's a weird criteria for an art. Like I can't define it. I don't think it's digital or traditional, where something makes you want to draw or write.
Yeah, well,
Like
yeah,
period. And
get
that's, I think,
into it.
you get into it.
There was no there was no possibility of drawing digitally. There wasn't the possibility of making digital animation. All these things didn't exist when I grew up. So of course I did what existed, so it hadn't changed for hundreds of years. I used nibs. So yeah, the question is, I'm still thinking about print, but probably at a different time, I wouldn't even think about print anymore. Think about something, that kinds of things people look at, time-based stuff. So we're all just products of what we grow up with. And yeah, I wanted to make animation when I was a kid, and it was so much the technical aspect of it just ended it for me. I couldn't do it. I didn't want to get involved. I cry. So maybe I would have done something else. So who knows? Just yeah, making drawings was the least physical exertion involved. I gave up the idea of painting. Painting was an enormous amount of physical work. So, but not that I ever wanted to really do that. But anyway, yeah, but it's no, it's that's it. There's a generation that even has this remorse about giving it up, or giving up drawing on paper. I mean, students of mine, they don't have that problem. They just do it. That's how you make images, either with a camera or with this thing on a screen.
I guess that maybe it was on a weird cusp generation.
Yeah.
Where
yeah.
Like I remember reading that, like you're saying, you animation seemed too hard or impossible in a certain way. And I remember reading animation books when I was a little kid, and it's like, what? I've got to go develop. I got to send my film. I got to get a camera. Then I got to send film to a lab.
Yeah.
Like what am I supposed to do? I'm just trying to draw this thing. I could get the movement down, but now I have to send this away. Like I'm like getting sea monkeys in the mail. Like this this is impossible.
Well, I don't know. Yeah,
That's changed.
getting weak. The human race is getting too weak to do anything to draw or to hold a pencil. So you hold this style. I mean, it's a little softer, this thing.
It's true. You don't wear it down your hand as hard when you use a stylus. I noticed that. That first frame of me drawing on the carpet was where I got a drawing callus. That callus has gotten softer.
Right.
You know, because of the stylus.
Yeah.
But I don't want to bleed, you know.
Coming around, you know. Yeah, there is a number of students want to go back to living, you know, like they're in the 60s and they want to shoot film and they want to draw on paper, and they grow up with digital stuff, so it's just nothing, doesn't mean, not as exciting to them. But that's, you know, it'll flip flop back and forth for, I think. But yeah,
I hope an infinite flip flop.
yeah,
But
it's fun to see people excited about, you know, drawing with nibs and things. But I don't know. I don't think drawing was. It was just like a necessity to get these stories done. So you know, yeah, I would have preferred doing them in the theater, but I was completely impossibly complicated. So it was an easy way to get these stories on paper without, you know, dealing with actors and everybody making movies. Yeah, I made some movies when I was a little kid. And I said, and it was obviously that's what, if you grew up watching mainly, you know, movies and TV, and that that seemed like an obvious thing. And so,
well, yeah, that's what's, not to belabor that point, but I know for me that video games make it weirder that way, where that's why I bring up like Finnegan's Wake, like nonlinear thought, when it's more about setting up the space. I guess theater is that way too, setting up the space, hiring the actors, setting the stage, and then letting the narrative play out, right?
Well, the audience, you get a bored audience, you're in trouble. So
that's true, and we may have one now.
Anyway, we can. So thank you. That was great. Like, I love to see these alternative histories of people who make comics. Great.
Oh man,
really exciting.
I love the symposium. I know it's through Austin that I got the chance to be part of it.
Yeah,
but I appreciate you
yeah, it was great. Thank you
it
again, Jesse.
Yeah.
And see you all next week. Austin will be back next week.
Ron Rigi.
Yeah, it should be interesting. So take care, everybody.
Thanks so much,
Thank
folks.
you. Thank you.